The moment the water spilled, it felt like the entire office froze in disbelief. Every eye turned toward the janitor, a middle-aged man in faded overalls, as a thin stream of clear water dripped down the side of the CEO's laptop. He didn't flinch, he didn't even speak. He just stood there, holding the half-empty mop bucket with trembling hands, while the sleek, black device hissed and sputtered like it was alive and in pain. The CEO, a woman known for her unshakable poise and ruthless efficiency, leaned back from her polished mahogany desk, her eyes widening, her lips parting in a silent gasp. The room smelled of antiseptic, lemon-scented cleaning products, and something else, fear, mingled with shock. What are you doing?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the air like glass breaking, yet there was a strange quiver hidden beneath her authority, a crack in the steel armor she had spent decades forging. The janitor, whose name was Michael, simply lowered the mop bucket and looked at her with eyes so raw and tired they seemed to carry the weight of an entire lifetime. "I didn't mean to, Mom," he stammered, his voice cracking, thick with exhaustion and embarrassment. But it wasn't a lie, not exactly. Because deep inside, he hadn't truly realized what he was about to do, what he had just done, until the water was already cascading over the keyboard, and the screen flickered with that ghostly, electric glow. The CEO's assistant shrieked, running to grab paper towels, while Michael stood frozen, his palms damp and trembling. His uniform smelled faintly of laundry detergent, a scent that reminded him painfully of his small apartment, where his 7-year-old son, Jamie, waited for him to come home, waiting with that earnest hope only children possess. Michael had been a janitor for 15 years, moving from building to building, cleaning floors, emptying trash cans, sometimes overlooked, sometimes mocked, but always unseen. He wasn't invisible because he wanted to be, he was invisible because the world made it easier to ignore someone like him. And yet, at this precise moment, his hands rough, calloused from scrubbing endless spills and stains that never belonged to him, had betrayed him, and he felt a wave of shame crash over his chest. But then, the CEO leaned forward, her fingers trembling as she touched the wet keyboard. The entire office held its breath, waiting for a scream, a firing, a storm of anger. But it didn't come. Instead, her face changed slowly, almost imperceptibly, as her eyes focused on the screen. It wasn't the destruction of her expensive laptop she noticed, it was the image staring back at her. On the screen, amidst the chaos of cascading error messages, was a live video. A simple, grainy feed from a local hospital, and there in a dimly lit pediatric ward, was a little boy holding a tiny, crumpled drawing in his hands, his eyes wide with hope, looking up at a nurse. And the boy looked exactly like Michael's son. Michael's heart stopped. The blood in his veins seemed to freeze as he realized what she was seeing, and what she would soon understand. He had been cleaning this office, as he had done countless times. When a notification had appeared on the CEO's laptop, an email, a video link, something meant to be private and important, something no one had expected him to see. And without thinking, without understanding the gravity, he had done what any tired, distracted human might do. He tried to move, to adjust, and the water tipped. Now the video flickered. A single frame paused in that perfect, gut-wrenching moment where the boy looked straight into the camera, holding a handwritten thank you card. His tiny handwriting spelled out 3 simple words. "You are love." The CEO's chest tightened, a sudden lump forming in her throat. She had spent her entire career climbing a ladder built on numbers, profits, acquisitions, and quarterly reports. Kindness had been optional, a weakness, a distraction. And yet here it was, crashing into her world with the force of something she had spent her life avoiding. Michael's presence, the spilled water, the accidental intrusion, it had uncovered something she had been desperate to ignore. And she realized, in that moment, that this small, unseen janitor had just given her a window into something more human, more fragile, more real than any spreadsheet ever could. Michael swallowed hard, unable to meet her gaze. He wanted to apologize, to run, to hide somewhere behind the polished walls of the office he had cleaned for years. But he couldn't. He felt trapped, exposed. His heart hammering in a rhythm that echoed in his ears louder than any keyboard ever could. He saw her hand hover above the laptop, hovering, trembling, unsure whether to close it, delete it, or just stare. And for a heartbeat, they both existed in the same fragile space, 2 strangers connected by an accident, a child, and a truth neither had expected. Then the CEO spoke, her voice softer now, almost a whisper, though still commanding. "Where did you get this?" she asked, her eyes still locked on the screen. and something in her tone suggested she wasn't asking about the video itself, but about him. About the man who'd made the world stop for a single, unguarded moment. Michael's throat went dry. He could feel the sweat trickling down his neck, mingling with the water still dripping from the laptop. And yet, against every instinct screaming at him to run, to vanish, he spoke. "That's my son," he said simply, his voice shaking. "Hey, he's sick. Anyo, you helped." The CEO froze, her eyes widening with a mix of shock and recognition. The words didn't need to make sense yet, they resonated on a level deeper than logic. She had been about to scream, about to fire, about to storm the room with fury, but instead, she felt something she hadn't felt in years, a sudden, inexplicable empathy. And as the office around them buzzed with whispered speculation, Michael realized that the spilled water, the chaos, the shame, it didn't matter anymore. Because for the first time in a long time, someone had looked past him, past the uniform, past the mop bucket, and had seen the very thing that had always defined him, a father, desperate to care for his child, and in that moment, everything changed. The office, once a place of prohibition and silent hierarchies, now felt suffocatingly intimate. Every ticking second seemed louder, heavier, as if time itself had slowed to witness what was unfolding. Michael's hand still trembled. Water dripping from the laptop, forming small puddles on the pristine wooden floor, each drop echoing like a heartbeat. The CEO, Elena Davenport, known across industries as a figure of unyielding precision, sat frozen. Her fingers hovering above the keyboard as if she might touch the boy on the screen, and somehow bridge the impossible distance between their worlds. Her mind raced, a storm of disbelief and emotion swirling inside her. But there was also something quieter, subtler, the tug of recognition. She knew, even without fully understanding, that this was not just any random video. This boy, holding his trembling little card, was tethered to the janitor before her in ways the world could not see. "Your son, he's..." Elena's voice broke, faltering into an unfamiliar vulnerability. She had never allowed herself to falter, not in boardrooms, not in negotiations, not in front of her assistants who whispered about her ruthlessness. But this wasn't about business. This was raw, human, and terrifying in its clarity. Michael's throat tightened. He could feel the weight of her gaze, not judgment, not scorn, but something infinitely more disarming, genuine concern. He shifted his gaze to the floor, ashamed at the chaos his clumsy mistake had caused, yet relieved by her unexpected pause. "Hey, he's very sick," he admitted, his voice low, a quiet confession that felt like it had been buried for years. "The doctors, they say there's not much time. But he's my world." His words hung in the room, fragile, like fine crystal teetering on the edge of a shelf. Elena exhaled slowly, her mind still grappling with the implications. She had been reviewing proposals, quarterly reports, expansion strategies, and now she was staring at a child's shaky drawing of a sun and clouds, his name scribbled in a childish hand at the bottom. It was simple. Narva. But it carried more weight than any contract ever could. The office seemed to shrink around them, the polished surfaces fading into the background, leaving only the raw vulnerability of a father's love, and the fragile humanity of a little boy who had no idea the chaos his existence had just caused. She finally leaned closer to the screen, her voice softer now, hesitant, almost fragile. This was meant for me?" she asked, not accusingly, but curiously, her professional armor replaced by a sudden warmth she hadn't recognized in years. Michael nodded, his voice barely audible. "Yes, you donated. You helped pay for his treatments when we didn't have enough. I didn't know who you were until today." The words tumbled out, simple, honest, and powerful in their rawness. Elena's eyes widened, the realization hitting her with the force of a tidal wave. She had always believed that her work, her money, her influence, her carefully calculated generosity, was invisible, tucked behind foundations, masked by anonymity. And yet here it was, visible in the trembling hands of a father who had never forgotten. Michael's chest tightened as he spoke, and memories began to flood him. Nights spent pacing the small apartment with Jamie asleep in the next room, counting every coin, scrubbing floors until his knees ached, all to ensure that his son could see another sunrise. Every spilled mop, every aching muscle, every quiet humiliation he had endured suddenly converged in this single impossible moment. And Elena, once a figure of untouchable power, was now looking at him, not as a janitor, not as a minor inconvenience, but as a man whose love had defied every barrier the world had placed before him. "Why didn't you say anything?" Elena asked softly, her voice carrying a mixture of guilt and wonder. "You could have reached out, you could have asked." Michael shook his head, a bittersweet smile tugging at the corner of his lips. I didn't want charity, I didn't want pity. I just wanted to be a good father, one day at a time. That's all I know how to do. The simplicity of his words hit her harder than any speech she had ever heard, each syllable a quiet, piercing truth. She swallowed, her throat tight, and realized that for years she had given, but never understood the cost of receiving, the human weight behind the gratitude. The office was quiet again, except for the faint drip of water from the laptop and the low hum of the city outside. Elena closed her eyes for a moment, processing everything. The man in front of her, whom she had seen countless times in passing, cleaning after others invisible, had just confronted her with a truth she couldn't ignore. Kindness, real unvarnished kindness, had faces, names, and stories. She felt a sudden, visceral desire to do something, to act, to bridge the gap between her world and his. And she realized something terrifyingly beautiful. She didn't want to just help. She wanted to understand. She wanted to know the life behind the mop, the moments she had overlooked, the sacrifices she had never noticed. Michael, meanwhile, felt an unfamiliar mix of shame and relief. Shame for the chaos, for the accident, for the disruption. Relief because, for the first time in years, someone had seen him, not the uniform, not the title, not the job, but him. A man fighting a battle every single day that no one else could see. And as he glanced at the screen again, at his son's hopeful eyes and crooked smile, he felt a glimmer of something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time: hope. Elena's voice broke the silence, steady now, almost commanding, but soft, compassionate. Michael, tell me everything. I want to know everything about your son, about your life. I want to help, if you'll let me. The offer, unexpected and profound, made Michael blink. He had spent years thinking that kindness came at a cost he couldn't afford. Now it was being offered freely, without judgment, without obligation, just human compassion laid bare. His throat went dry, and he struggled to find words that felt adequate. But the lump in his chest, the ache of too many sleepless nights, the quiet desperation of fatherhood, suddenly had a voice. And as they sat there, a janitor and a CEO, separated by worlds yet connected in an instant of raw humanity, the office felt smaller, warmer, infinitely more alive. For the first time, Michael realized that the world didn't have to be cruel, that there were bridges to be built, and that sometimes, kindness could arrive in the most unexpected, chaotic ways. Even in a mop bucket spilling water over a laptop. The moments that followed were quiet, almost reverent. The office no longer felt like a battlefield of deadlines and power plays. It had transformed into something else, fragile and tentative, like the first glimmer of sunlight breaking through a storm. Elena closed the laptop carefully, her fingers brushing over the damp keys. And for the first time, she allowed herself to really look at Michael, not as a janitor, not as an employee who tidied her office unnoticed, but as a man whose love and devotion had been invisible to the world, yet unwavering. She gestured toward the chair across from her, an invitation that carried more weight than any contract she had ever signed. Michael hesitated. Habits of invisibility die slowly, and the janitor in him still wanted to retreat, to vanish, to pretend nothing had happened. But the father in him knew this was a rare, fleeting chance, an opening into a world he had never dared step into. He sat, his movements cautious, as though the mere act of occupying a space meant for others was an act of daring. I want to understand. Elena began, her voice steady but tender. Tell me everything about him, about your son. Michael took a deep breath, feeling the weight of years pressing down on his chest. He began slowly, the words unspooling like threads of memory and emotion. He spoke of Jamie's first steps, the way he had clutched Michael's finger with such determination that he refused to let go, even as the world demanded independence. He told her about the sleepless nights filled with hospital lights and monitors beeping, the endless forms, the endless waiting rooms, and the quiet panic that came from counting every dime, every breath, every heartbeat. He described the little things, the favorite bedtime story read over and over, the way Jamie's laughter could cut through exhaustion like a blade, the crooked smile that never failed to ignite hope in the darkest moments. Elena listened, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, eyes wide and glistening. She realized that all the power in the world, all the wealth she had amassed, had never given her the privilege of witnessing such raw, unguarded humanity. And here it was, laid bare in front of her by a man she had barely noticed before, a man she had taken for granted. The juxtaposition struck her with a force she couldn't ignore. The world could be cruel, yes, but it could also be unexpectedly beautiful, unpredictable. And astonishingly kind. You've carried so much alone, she finally whispered, her voice breaking as tears pricked at the corners of her eyes. And yet you've never stopped loving him, never stopped trying, even when no one else noticed. Michael shook his head, a bitter smile tugging at his lips. I've done what any parent would do. But most people don't see it. Most people don't care. His eyes flicked toward the window, toward the city beyond, where lives carried on, oblivious to the small dramas and heroics of quiet, unnoticed lives. Elena leaned forward, a sudden determination in her posture. I see it, she said firmly. I see you. And I want to help, not because it benefits me, not because it's convenient, but because it matters, because it's real, because it's human. Michael felt something inside him shift, a trembling hope that had long been buried under fatigue and despair. He wanted to protest, to insist that he didn't deserve this, that he had survived on his own, that kindness like this always came with strings attached. But as he glanced again at the paused video on the laptop, the little boy with wide, trusting eyes and a hand drawn, "Thank you," he realized there was no need for protest. This wasn't about repayment or obligation. It was about recognition, about acknowledgement, about the simple, profound act of someone truly seeing you. Elena reached into her drawer and pulled out an envelope, yellowed slightly at the edges, and set it gently on the desk. "This is for him," she said, voice steady. "Not for you, not for appearances. For him, and I want you to know you're not alone anymore, whatever he needs. Whatever you need, we'll figure it out together." Michael's hands trembled as he picked it up, carefully feeling the weight of possibility and generosity inside. His mind raced with a mixture of disbelief and gratitude, a cocktail so potent it left him momentarily speechless. He had never experienced kindness so freely offered, so devoid of pretense, so human. The silence in the room was thick, filled with unspoken emotions, with the gravity of a world shifting in small, unheralded ways. And then, as if to punctuate the moment, Michael's phone buzzed softly in his pocket. He glanced down. It was a photo from Jamie, a drawing of two stick figures holding hands, one much taller than the other, with the words scrawled beneath, "Daddy, you are my hero." The tears came then, unbidden and unstoppable, tracing tracks down his weathered cheeks. Elena watched her, standing the weight of that single image, the power of love, the quiet heroism of parenthood, the strength found in small, daily battles fought in invisible arenas. She spoke again, her voice low, almost reverent. "You've already been a hero, Michael. You just never realized it." His breath hitched, and he could only nod, the full magnitude of her words settling into his chest like a sudden, burning light. And in that light, he felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years, that maybe, just maybe, the world could surprise him. That amidst the monotony, the struggle, the relentless grind of survival, there could be moments of connection that shattered every expectation, that rewrote the rules of what was possible. Outside, the city moved on, oblivious to the quiet drama unfolding inside that high-rise office. But inside, time had shifted. A janitor and a CO2 people from entirely different worlds had collided in a moment of accident, honesty, and revelation. And in that collision, something profound had been born: trust, understanding, and the fragile beginnings of a bond that neither could have anticipated. Michael looked at Elena again, his voice breaking as he finally spoke. "Thank you for seeing him, for seeing me." And for the first time in what felt like forever, he believed it. Not just the words, but the truth behind them. The next days blurred together in a strange, almost surreal rhythm. Michael returned to his janitorial duties, but the office now felt entirely different. Each polished floor, each empty trash bin, each faint smell of cleaning solution was a reminder that something profound had shifted. The invisible boundaries that had kept him on the outskirts of life were cracking. Elena didn't summon him with an air of condescension or obligation. Instead, she began to find small ways to connect, to understand, to bridge the chasm that had existed for years. It began subtly. A cup of coffee left at his station with a note that read, "For the hardest worker I know." Michael had almost missed it. The note tutted the edge of the counter, but when he saw it, something warm and unsteady spread through him. A mixture of disbelief, gratitude, and a fragile, trembling hope. He found himself thinking of Jamie constantly, picturing his son's smile, the uneven handwriting, the way he held on to even the smallest joys with fierce determination. Every time Michael glanced at the office door, he imagined Jamie's tiny hands clutching his father's finger, his wide, trusting eyes reflecting hope. And now for the first time, he sensed that hope mirrored back, not just in a hospital ward or a video screen, but in the real world, Elena had somehow become a quiet ally, someone whose influence and resources could extend far beyond the polished office walls. But Michael was wary. He had spent a lifetime surviving on independence, on self-reliance. Accepting help felt foreign, almost uncomfortable. Yet at the same time it was intoxicating. It wasn't long before the ripple effects of that one accidental spill became apparent. Elena personally oversaw arrangements for Jamie's treatment, ensuring that doctors, medications, and appointments were coordinated with a precision that only she could command. Michael found himself following detailed plans, bewildered by the sudden efficiency and care that was being poured into his son's fragile life. And yet, through it all, she never made him feel small or indebted. Every interaction was steeped in respect and empathy. She would ask about his day, about Jamie's mood, about the little victories and setbacks, never treating the conversations as interruptions to her empire, but as moments of genuine connection. Michael felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years: trust. One evening, after a particularly long day filled with hospital visits and office meetings, Michael returned home, his back aching, his hands raw, but his heart strangely light. Jamie was asleep on the couch, a small blanket tucked around him, a half-finished drawing of the two of them lying nearby. Michael knelt beside the boy, brushing his son's hair back from his forehead, marveling at the way sunlight, or, in this case, the soft glow of the living room lamp, seemed to illuminate every small detail. He placed the drawing on the table, staring at the uneven lines, the shaky letters spelling out, "Daddy, my hero." His throat tightened, and he realized he had been holding back tears all day. Here was a tangible representation of the love that had kept him moving through every hardship, every late night, every lonely moment, breaking the fragile quiet. Michael answered, expecting another hospital update or logistical inquiry, but it was Elena. "Michael," she said softly, her voice carrying a rare intimacy, "I wanted to check on him. On you too." He smiled faintly, overwhelmed by the fact that a person of such influence could care with such sincerity. "He's asleep now," he replied. He's doing okay." Elena's pause was brief, but it carried a depth that spoke louder than any words could. "Good," she said finally. "I just wanted to remind you that you're not alone. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." Michael held the phone in his hand, staring at the ceiling, trying to reconcile the life he had known, a life of struggle, invisibility, and endless responsibility, with this sudden, unexpected generosity. Days turned into weeks and the bond between them grew, subtle yet unbreakable. Michael continued his work in the office, but now instead of feeling like an invisible observer, he felt part of something larger, part of a story that mattered. And Jamie's health, bolstered by Elena's support, began to stabilize. There were still challenges, sleepless nights, and moments of fear, but there was also light. There were moments when Michael watched his son laugh freely, play with toys, draw pictures, and for the first time in years believe that the world could be kind. Elena, too, found herself transformed. She had spent her life building walls around her office, her heart, her life. She had believed that kindness had to be calculated, transactional, controlled. But Michael had shattered that illusion with a single, clumsy act. His honesty, his raw devotion, and the purity of his love for his son forced her to confront a truth she had long avoided. That real influence comes not from power or wealth alone, but from the ability to recognize humanity, to act selflessly, to see the unseen. She realized that her generosity had always been faceless, measured in numbers, statistics, and philanthropy reports, but this was different. This was living, breathing, messy, imperfect, and utterly transformative. One afternoon, Elena invited Michael and Jamie to the office for a small celebration. It was informal, nothing lavish, just a way to show the tangible impact of their shared journey. Jamie's eyes widened as he explored the glass and steel corridors, fascinated by the enormous windows, the polished floors, and the sheer scale of the place. Michael walked beside him, hand firmly clasping his son's, feeling a profound sense of pride, not in the wealth or the office, but in the resilience of his son, the bond that had carried them through the darkest nights, and the unexpected kindness that had illuminated their path. Elena watched them, quietly moved, her heart swelling with an empathy she hadn't allowed herself in decades. She realized that this accidental spill, the moment that could have been a disaster, had become a catalyst for change, for connection, and for hope. And as Michael looked down at Jamie's smiling face, he understood something profound. Life was unpredictable, fragile, and often painfully unfair, but moments of genuine connection, moments when kindness arrived unexpectedly, had the power to rewrite destinies. He felt the ache of struggle, yes, but he also felt the unmistakable surge of gratitude and possibility. And for the first time in years he allowed himself to believe, not just hope, but truly believe, that the world could surprise him with goodness, that love could be seen, recognized and nurtured, and that even in the most chaotic, unlikely circumstances, a single act, no matter how clumsy, could change everything. The weeks turned into months, and Michael's life began to shift in ways he hadn't imagined possible. The initial shock of the laptop incident had faded, but its ripple effects were only growing stronger. Elena continued to stay involved, not as a distant benefactor but as someone genuinely invested in the well-being of both Michael and Jamie. She would call, check in on appointments, arrange additional therapies, and even come to the hospital for routine visits, always careful to respect Michael's dignity. For him it was overwhelming, almost surreal. He had lived a life defined by struggle, by invisibility, by constant scrambles just to keep his son alive and safe. And now, suddenly, someone with immense power and influence was walking beside him, not to overshadow, but to amplify the love and care he had been giving all along. Jamie, meanwhile, began to flourish in ways Michael had only dared dream of. The treatments, carefully coordinated and supported by Elena's resources, were working. The small victories, the first unassisted step, a clear night's sleep, a laugh that bounced through their tiny apartment, felt monumental. Michael would watch his son play, heart swelling with pride and disbelief, thinking back to the night he had spilled the water, how it had seemed like a disaster, and how that single, accidental moment had opened the door to a world that suddenly seemed fuller, richer, more alive. He found himself thinking of the future not in terms of survival, but in terms of possibility. Dreams he had long abandoned suddenly felt within reach. One evening, after a particularly long day filled with therapy sessions and follow-up appointments, Michael and Jamie returned home to find a note slipped under the door. It was from Elena. The words were simple, but each one carried a weight that made Michael's chest ache. "You've been doing all the hard work for years. Let me help carry some of the weight. We're in this together." Michael sank to the floor, Jamie's small hand in his, and let the tears come freely. It was a release he hadn't allowed himself in a long time, grief, relief, exhaustion, and gratitude all mixing into a single, overwhelming wave. Jamie looked up at him, eyes wide and uncomprehending, and Michael smiled through his tears. "It's okay, buddy," he whispered. "Everything's going to be okay." And for the first time in years he believed it. Elena, on her end, began to see her own life transform as well. The encounter with Michael and Jamie had forced her to confront her own isolation, her own walls, the ways in which she had carefully constructed her life to avoid vulnerability and connection. She had spent decades in pursuit of success, power, and recognition, believing that these were the measures of a life well lived. But witnessing Michael's quiet heroism, the selfless devotion of a father who had never asked for praise or reward, had awakened something inside her that she had almost forgotten: the raw, human power of kindness and empathy. She found herself attending events, not for accolades, but to personally connect, to see lives transformed by her influence in ways that transcended numbers and statistics. One afternoon, Michael received an unexpected call from Elena. "I have something I want to show you," she said, her tone unusually warm, almost conspiratorial. When he arrived at the office he found a small, private room set up with a projector and a screen. Elena gestured for him and Jamie to sit, and when the lights dimmed, a series of images appeared, photos of Jamie, taken throughout his treatments, his milestones, his laughter, his moments of triumph and struggle. Each image was accompanied by short captions: courage, resilience, love. Michael felt his throat tighten, overwhelmed by the care and thought that had gone into this presentation. Elena spoke softly, almost reverently. "This is for you. To remind you of what you've been doing all along, and to show that your efforts, your sacrifices, they matter. They're seen, they're recognized." Jamie clapped his tiny hands, laughing with joy, while Michael sat, tears streaming, feeling the magnitude of a world he had once thought inaccessible finally opening to him. He realized then that the spilled water, the accidental intrusion, had not been a mistake. It had been a bridge, a catalyst, a moment of chaos that revealed the hidden truths of love, devotion, and human connection. And as he looked at Elena, seeing the genuine care in her eyes, he understood that kindness, when given freely and without expectation, could be transformative, not just for the recipient, but for the giver as well. Days later, Michael walked through hospital corridors with Jamie by his side, feeling a sense of ease he had never known. Nurses smiled at him, some whispering about the miraculous progress of his son, while doctors nodded respectfully, acknowledging the dedication and love that had carried Jamie through countless challenges. And in that moment, Michael felt a profound clarity that life, despite its hardships and unpredictability, was capable of extraordinary grace. One clumsy moment, a spilled bucket of water, had unraveled a chain of events that reshaped destinies, that fostered deep human connection, that reminded him of the extraordinary power of seeing and being seen. At home that night, Michael tucked Jamie into bed, holding him close, feeling the warmth and steady rhythm of his heartbeat against his chest. He thought of Alina, of the office, of the video on the laptop, of the small acts of courage and kindness that had brought them here. And he realized that his story was far from over. It was a story of resilience, of love, of the unexpected ways the universe could intervene when least expected. And as Jamie drifted into sleep, clutching his father's hand, Michael whispered softly, "We're going to be okay. We really are." The next morning, Michael awoke to a sense of quiet anticipation, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. The apartment was still, the faint hum of the city outside mixing with the soft breathing of his son, curled beneath the blanket with an innocent trust that weighed more than any treasure he had ever known. Michael rose slowly, careful not to wake Jamie, and went to the small kitchen. As he poured a cup of coffee, he thought back to the first moment he had spilled water on Elena's laptop, the shock, the fear, the shame, and marveled at how a single, clumsy accident had reshaped the trajectory of his life. Who would have imagined that a moment of panic could become a doorway to hope, to kindness, to transformation? He smiled faintly, letting the warmth of the coffee seep into his chest, and felt a quiet determination rising. This was no longer about mere survival. It was about living, truly living, in the light of connection and gratitude. Later that day, he returned to the office, Jamie skipping beside him, excitement radiating from every movement. Elena greeted them warmly, her usual executive precision softened by a tenderness that had only grown since the spill. She knelt to Jamie's level, and the boy grinned broadly, wrapping his tiny arms around her waist. It was a moment of pure, unfiltered joy, a reminder that despite wealth, power, or status, the most profound gifts in life were love, trust, and human connection. Michael watched them, heart swelling, realizing that in the chaos of life, in the relentless grind of responsibility and survival, these moments were the true measure of significance. Elena gestured for them to sit, and the three of them spent hours talking, sharing stories, and laughing. Michael spoke of Jamie's small victories, in moments that went unnoticed in the world outside, the first successful therapy session, a laugh at a silly joke, the quiet resilience that defined his son. Elena shared glimpses of her own life, the pressures, the loneliness, the self-imposed barriers she had carried for decades. And in that exchange, a remarkable understanding blossomed. They were no longer janitor and CEO, benefactor and recipient. They were witnesses to each other's humanity, participants in a story of struggle, hope, and extraordinary kindness. Weeks turned into months, and the collaboration between them deepened. Elena used her influence to create a foundation dedicated to supporting families like Michael's, families who carried the invisible burdens of illness, poverty, and unacknowledged love. Michael became a spokesperson, not for fame, not for reward, but to give voice to the countless unseen acts of heroism performed every day by parents, caregivers, and ordinary people whose courage went unnoticed. Each time he spoke, he felt Jamie's presence in the room, the boy's wide, trusting eyes reminding him why he had persevered, why he had endured, why he had never given up. And every time, Elena stood beside him, a reminder that kindness, when genuine and fearless, could ripple outward and transform lives beyond imagination. One quiet evening, Michael and Jamie returned home after a long day at the foundation. Jamie fell asleep quickly, exhaustion tempered by joy, and Michael sat by the window, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. He thought about the journey, the water spill, the video, the fear, the revelation, the acts of generosity and trust that had unfolded from a single, accidental moment. He realized that life's beauty often emerged from chaos, that unexpected acts of vulnerability and kindness could open doors to unimaginable change. And he understood, with a clarity that filled him with awe, that he had been seen, truly seen, and that recognition had the power to heal, to inspire, and to transform not just a moment, but a lifetime. The following morning, Michael received a call from Elena. Her voice was warm, vibrant, filled with the excitement of someone sharing something precious. "Michael," she said, "I've arranged a meeting for Jamie to visit a special program, one that could change everything for him. I want you both to come." Michael felt his chest tighten, a mix of anticipation, relief, and gratitude washing over him. As he looked at his son, sleeping peacefully, he whispered softly, "We're going to see what's possible, Jamie, together." The boy stirred, murmuring something unintelligible, his tiny hand brushing against his father's in quiet acknowledgement. As they stepped out into the world that day, Michael felt a profound sense of purpose and possibility. He knew life would never be without challenges, that struggles would continue, that uncertainties would persist. But he also knew something more powerful, that kindness, courage, and love had the power to illuminate even the darkest paths, to create bridges across seemingly insurmountable divides, and to transform despair into hope. And in that understanding, Michael found not just relief, but triumph, not in wealth, not in status, not in recognition, but in the simple, enduring truth that love, when witnessed and nurtured, could rewrite destinies. As he walked hand in hand with Jamie, Michael glanced back toward the towering office building where it had all begun, the spilled water, the laptop, the moment of fear and revelation that had sparked a chain of kindness that neither he nor Alina could have predicted. A smile curved his lips. The world was unpredictable, fragile, and often cruel, but it was also capable of extraordinary grace. And Michael, a janitor who had once been invisible, now carried with him a quiet certainty that even the smallest, most unexpected acts could create ripples of love, hope, and transformation that lasted far beyond a single moment, far beyond a single life. And as father and son walked into the future, side by side, a new chapter began, not written in fear or survival, but in courage, compassion, and the luminous, unstoppable power of kindness.